everyone, and welcome to this special edition of the Daily Debrief. We are live in the McStay family murder trial out of California, where defendant Charles Merritt faces charges and a possible death penalty if convicted over the deaths of a business associate and that business associate's family. We are still in the midst of the defense opening statement, so let's listen in live.
Inside the grave with her, the right cup was found outside, and between the two, it was cut. Either knife, scissors, say knife. And painter's tape was found in the grave from the house. Evidence can show that's probably a way they got her out of the house, controlled her that way by putting tape around her. Even Sergeant Ryan Smith, who's seated here, in his DNA analysis request form said, we believe Summer was raped before she was murdered. Here's the left bra cup. You can see that cut line there. The right one, you can see it cut there. The panties are tied up with the pants. And again, a statement of what they believe happened to him. Gianni, who's been with Summer, had multiple skull fractures to his head, multiple blunt force trauma. He also was not wrapped up. He was wearing his little black pants and diaper and buried with his backpack he liked to carry around. All that's important what they were found in, because Joseph was wrapped up. The evidence shows that you wrap somebody up when you kill them and you want to transport them. You don't want blood to get everywhere. Somebody killed Joseph somewhere and brought him to that gravesite. Summer and the kids, on the other hand, evidence shows were killed there. That's why they weren't wrapped up. That's why she was raped there before she was killed. That's why her clothes are half out of the grave, half in the grave, ripped off her body. They were killed at separate times. They were brought in separate vehicles. They say Merritt buried the McStay family alone. The problem is, there's 2 tire tracks to the 2 separate graves, and they're separate widths. One thing that's odd to me is they didn't follow protocol when they were collecting everything. They didn't document everything correctly where they were finding it. They didn't photograph all items that were recovered where they were recovered. Always, always. Oh, this is important. Let me take a picture of it before I pick it up. Let me document where it is. They had a fixed point that they marked between the 2 graves so they can measure the distances from each other for the graves, but when they start finding items, they just forgot about it. We don't know how far anything was found. There's a lot of pieces of evidence. I want to know how close it was, but we will never know. They can take pictures and then give us measurements. Defense trying to figure out what happened. We obtained a photograph that you will see from the San Bernardino County Department of Public Works, their surveyor unit. They fly planes over the county all year, every year. Lo and behold, on February 12th, they have flown over the graves. People didn't grab them. We did. What they show, fresh tire track. You can see the 2 graves there. You can kind of see the truck driving into them. Just the 2 graves alone tell you it's 2 teams. If you're one person killing 4 people and you're going to bury them, you're going to dig 1 hole and put them all in. You're not going to dig 1 hole, put a couple in, move your car to dig another hole 20 feet away to dig another. That makes no sense. It's two teams that are far enough apart so they don't hit each other. They're working at the same time. If it's not chased by itself, then the theory's gone. But confirmation bias, let's ignore that fact. Let's ignore the logic that years of police experience should teach you. County photographs show you the two people there. The fact that he was wrapped up show he was killed elsewhere. Keys in his pocket suggest a significant issue. Who drove it and when? Did Joseph drive it down to San Diego? And then was he taken from then? I don't know. The fact that some of the two kids weren't wrapped up, again, tells you they were killed at the grave site. Her clothes were removed and discovered at the scene. The knife is there, cutting the bra apart. Sweatpants are off of her. They believe he was raped. Bra shows that she was raped at knife point. That means there's two murder weapons at the scene. Now, do we know if any of these family members were stabbed? No. Cut? No. Because all the flesh is gone. They could have been stabbed to death, bleeding, and their heads crushed with a 3-pound sledgehammer to make sure it's done. If you're one person, why do you need two? Also, the Victorville grave sites, they say show that Chase was involved because he's the only one that knows Victorville. I tell you, the place where that's located shows the person didn't know where they were. The grave site's the first geographical location that's undeveloped north of Fallbrook following the 15 freeway. First one. You're driving around, you're like, here's a spot. Let's just get off and get rid of these bodies here. The grave sites are only a quarter mile off the freeway. Quarter mile. And they were truly familiar with the area. They would have known they could have just drove up a little bit further and gone to the secluded area. So let's go with first showing you how it's the first undeveloped area. Here's Fallbrook, 15 north. Their house is right over here. You head up to Marietta. Marietta goes to Lake Elsinore, all developed. Lake Elsinore goes up to Norco. Norco goes up to Mira Loma, which all the way goes to Rancho, Cajon Pass. Get to the Cajon Pass. Here's Victorville. Lo and behold, Victorville, first undeveloped area, where they got off. And that's how close it is to the freeway. Right there. You didn't know where you were. It's 2.6 miles. This is the service road called the Old Quarry Road. Likely the killers drove down here and then up that path. If you knew the area, you knew you just go up Old Quarry Road, but we'll get to that. Here's the view, how close the freeway is. This is where the investigators park, go to the grave site. That's how close it is. They could have parked at the freeway and walked over. Graves are here. They could have just went up here. All these roads lead in all these hills and secluded areas. If you knew the area, you just go up there. There's silver shafts. There's everything up there. Everybody knows that if you're up from the high desert, where all that stuff is. You knew it, that's where you would go. If you don't know the area, you just go right next to the freeway. DNA from the grave site excludes Charles Merritt. That's correct. Nobody knows this but us. But the DNA evidence found inside both graves. We found it. See, the investigators, when they checked everything, they did a swab. They took a little piece of cotton and said, okay, is there anything on that? No. Okay. No DNA. Susanna Ryan, who is our DNA specialist, says, no. You need to do what's called an M-vac. Best way to describe it, it's like a wet vac. It sprays a saline solution on, and you vacuum all that solution off, and it's caught in a filter. It's 100 times more accurate at picking up DNA than just swab. Through this process, she was able to find DNA in almost every item she tested. And she'll say it's degraded. It's not something that was just placed there. It's simply broken down from being in the ground. Items that we had tested was stuff that was wrapped around Joseph. So whoever's killing them and wrapping them up, that's a good place to look because it's their DNA that's going to get on that because you're getting hands sweaty, you're pulling them off. We also want to look at the clothes that were taken off Summer's body. So we checked the bra and the panties. And DNA was found on those items. It was the digital results was generated. Those digital results were sent to a company that does a computer software analysis. Preliminary computer analysis is all we have now. Final results are due in 2 days. But they have developed profiles on those 5 items. They say we should be able to develop profiles. There's 4 of them. They said they're of unknown subjects, meaning it's not the McStay family, it's not Charles Merritt. They have been all excluded from the evidence inside the grave. So apparently, Chase killed this family, buried them, and put someone else's DNA on everything, and not his own. And we're still going to trial. Fact E. Cell tower history shows Merritt's at the gravesite on February 6th. That's what they're going to say. Well, their expert that they're calling, he has no technical training or education whatsoever. He has no expertise on the engineering behind the system or how they actually work. He is just told, hey, here's what you should say, just parrot it back. I've been to trainings. I've been to 40-hour trainings. What do? They told me to say this. Who taught you that? Well, they're law enforcement people. They told me what to say. They're just here to support law enforcement. You'll find he did not submit a written report detailing his findings. And no report, nobody can subject anything he's going to say to review. We'll have to figure it out on the fly when he's saying it. Why are they hiding that? Why are they afraid to write it? He will base his testimony on these basic maps that you've seen without any supporting evidence or understanding of how any of that works.
This is a special edition of the Daily Debrief here on the Law&Crime Network. Aaron Keller along with you as we listen to opening statements from the defense in the so-called McStay family murder case out of California. This is a case where defendant Charles Merritt is accused of killing his business partner, Joseph McStay, along with McStay's wife and McStay's 2 children. Law&Crime senior legal editor Ronn Blitzer is here with me in the studio. And Ron, I wanted to listen to that defense opening right there because this DNA issue is what observers are telling me is one of the key issues in this case. There is unknown DNA from the graves that is neither the victims nor this defendant, and testing isn't even complete yet.
Yeah, it's very interesting that we're going to trial here when a lot of this key evidence isn't even finished being tested yet. But the fact that the defense is able to put forward that there's DNA evidence at the gravesite that does not link the crime to the defendant is huge. You had the defense attorney saying in his opening statement, giving a number of reasons why it doesn't make sense for the defendant to have been the one to commit these crimes. He's talking about multiple grave sites and how the bodies were wrapped. But then he gets to the DNA, and I think that's going to have such a huge impression on the jurors, especially today where you have so many television programs that deal with the law and people hear DNA evidence and they think that's very important. They want to hear it. Exactly. They're expecting to hear DNA evidence, and when they hear from the defense, oh, there is DNA evidence, it just doesn't link to this guy, that's huge. And from a burden of proof standpoint, why isn't the state doing the testing? Why does it take the defense to step in and ask these questions and raise these issues? I mean, the state has the burden. Jurors are probably listening to the defense
saying, wait a minute, you're jumping through a lot of hoops to try to get your guy off the hook, but why didn't the state do this?
Well, that's a very good question. And, if the state did do this testing and it didn't match the defendant, they would have to turn that over because that would be exculpatory evidence.
Exactly. Well, we're going to continue listening to the defense opening statements in the McStay murder case when we return here on The Debrief. Welcome back, folks. Aaron Keller along with you on this special edition of the Daily Debrief here on the Law&Crime Network. We are continuing to monitor opening statements in the Charles Merritt case out of California. This is the so-called McStay family murder case. The defense still up giving opening statements after many, many, many minutes thus far of walking jurors exactly through what the defense thinks happened in this case. Let's listen to those arguments live.
These are some of the calls that you don't see in the FBI's report because they don't go with the story of, oh, look, he's downtown. Then he wrote a full detail of what he thinks of all the calls. He summarized them, showing where they could possibly be based on all the towers involved, whether or not there actually could be a location based on what he sees. He classifies some as unlocatable based on the delay in actually picking up the phone. You can't be with any certainty that that's the right tower to show location. He breaks it all down. He will explain this to you. We call him Vlad. Vlad can talk to you guys for 8 hours on the cell phones. I promise you we will try and keep it short so you don't gloss over. We're going to limit him. But by the end, you'll be convinced he knows what he's talking about. So clearly, cell phone wasn't at the graves. Fact F. Merritt left the Isuzu Trooper found at Mexico border on February 8th. They found him at the 8th, yes. This Isuzu Trooper was found parked at the border on the 8th. It was impounded by a towing company, parked there after hours. They said the car probably wouldn't have been there until after 7. It's funny, they have him driving up in Corona at 1:30, so apparently he took it off in the morning, but all the guys will tell you it worked a lot. Probably wasn't there until after 7. He drove the Isuzu Trooper. Well, one thing that's important, Joseph drove that Trooper when he met with Chase for lunch on the 4th. So Joseph, we know, was the last person to drive it, verified by seeing him on the 4th. And that was the last time anybody beyond his immediate family saw Joseph. Chase, so easy target. And we said, well, the DNA was found inside the Trooper. Right? So he had to have driven it. Well, there's also fingerprints found from inside the Trooper. They don't know who they belong to. Not Chase, it's not the family. And where were those fingerprints found? Right there in that coffee mug. We'll skip that. Doesn't mean our theory. Let's talk about the DNA found within inside the Trooper. The samples were taken. One swipe of the steering wheel with that whole cotton thing. And then they say, okay, we got one cotton. Let's just do everything in the center divider. So we don't know if they touched the environmental controls, the radio, the gear shift, or anything in the center console. We don't know, because they just swiped them all the same. And that's what the second one is. So, the steering wheel, a major contributor to this mixture of DNA, when they say contributors. When you have a DNA sample, there's more than one possible profile within it. They will call them contributors. Now look at the strength of those signals, because each allele strength is high or low. They can read all that, and they say, well, the major one's the one where they have a real high concentration of DNA. Minor ones are lower. Trace are just barely there. So on the steering wheel, Joseph's the major contributor. Makes sense, he drove the vehicle. Minor contributor is Chase Merritt. Trace contributor is Summer. Makes sense, I'm sure she's been in the car or touched Joseph before he threw it. DNA found on the driver controls, major contributor to Joseph, minor to Summer, and trace to Chase. So from steering wheel to gear shift, it drops. They say it shows he drove it to the border, to leave it at the border to throw off the investigation. One thing that's interesting about this is there's no DNA elsewhere in the vehicle where you'd expect to find it. If I'm driving a vehicle, I'm going to get in, I'm going to close the door, I'm going to put on my seatbelt, check the mirrors, move the seat if it's too short, all that. If I'm touching the steering wheel and the gear shift, I'm touching that too. No DNA on any of that stuff. And the seat was positioned up. It was still in the drive position where Joseph would have. Also, the investigators of San Bernardino said, well, if he drove it down there, how did he get back? Well, you're going to hear there's no service for taxis from that area at that time, and there's no evidence in any way how Merritt would have got home after dropping off that vehicle. So he would have had to either drove his vehicle to the border, then got back to the trooper to drive it down and then drive home, or he'd have to drive the trooper down back to his vehicle. No evidence either way of how he got out of there. And there's no cell phone record showing that he was ever near the border. What the evidence is consistent with is we're going to show that it's a DNA transfer. DNA gets transferred just like blood and everything else. I have a sweaty hand. I touch somebody, they can transfer my DNA. It's transferred by the last person Joseph saw that day, Chase. They met for lunch. They shook hands. Right hand to right hand. Good to see you again, brother. So, if I'm going to get in my car, I have this DNA on my right hand.
These are some really compelling defense opening statements in the so-called McStay family murder case out of California. We are going to sign off for those of you watching on the Daily Debrief and on Cox media stations, but our live coverage of this case continues on the Law and Crime Network. For those of you watching there, we will be back with more opening statements in just a moment from the McStay family murder case.